Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of the Reinsurance Podcast. I am your co-host, Jared Lee.
It's funny when I watch your brain think about what is my name every time. Anyway, no, Cody's told us this has to be a serious, practical episode today, so we will
That
keep it
voice
serious.
you're hearing is Ben Rose.
I was getting to it. I was just delaying long enough to remember my name too. But no, we are doing a serious episode today. Cody has tasked us with a special mission.
We want to talk about one of the really interesting parts of the reinsurance process, like what you do once you get better data and how you take it to market, etc. But like the grown adults that we are, when we're told to be serious, like a child in church, things are much funnier out of the gates. So we will rein it in before going into serious mode about how do cedents sort of leverage data in a more efficient way and what that allows them to do in preparation for reinsurance purchasing and everything else that they need to do downstream.
Yeah, I think this topic comes from a lot of questions we've been having around the market, really, as we help more and more cedents to structure their data, get it validated, and be sat on a giant pile of beautifully aggregated reinsurance submission data 3 months earlier than normal.
Yeah.
And they're all coming to us and saying, "Ooh, are you going to start doing this with pricing? Can we start doing this with planning?
Yeah.
Can we explore this that we couldn't do previously?" And I think what we wanted to do in this episode is really dig into, great, you've got amazing data quality. Your actuaries, your Ceded team are not spending all their time sorting Excel spreadsheets A to Z and trying to spot stacking policies. What do you do instead? And what does that mean for the success, especially including, the price you pay and what you get for it,
Yeah.
of your reinsurance deals as a buyer?
Yeah. We talk about the sort of aggregate benefit of getting the data done much more quickly. And one of the ideas we've discussed previously is it would allow you to prepare data nearer to the renewal cycle, right? So instead of having your data cut starting in the middle of the year for a 1/1 renewal, for example, you could do that data cut later in the year. Another approach you could take is do the data cut at the same time, but instead use that interim window that's now opened for you to begin to interrogate it with much greater efficiency to understand what's actually happening in the book, prepare for your budgets, prepare what you should purchase, and have a better understanding of what your exposure concerns are. So that's the other approach, right? Is not going out to the market with your data closer to the renewal, sort of at the last data cut, but instead keep the process the same, but use an additional, what do we've called it, hundreds of hours for every single treaty, right? So it's months of work.
Yeah, if you haven't seen that report, by the way, worth a look. We
Yeah.
were featured in the news recently for potentially saving the industry $300 million per year on just manual submissioning and sorting out all this data.
It was a shocking sort of result. I think even we were a bit surprised. We'd done a number of sort of case studies on the process, and we're shaving 85% of the sort of work involved with doing the data extract and the cleansing and the organization of it and the exhibit building and all of these things. Like, a lot of it can get automated much more quickly, and when you sort of remove the sort of tedium of adjusting your 2D tables, what you get out the back of that is a huge amount of free time. And the thing I think is most interesting in this process is this time we're freeing up is for most cedents with their smartest people. Like, we're freeing up your actuaries and we're freeing up your sort of Ceded team. Like, these people are driving sort of a huge amount of that brain power within the firm, or how they think about what they need to do as a business, how they should price their exposures, etc. So it's really high value time freeing up versus you know junior admins who are just rekeying stuff. It's this work is required to be done by the sort of more senior team members.
Yeah, and I think what we're starting to see from a few of the students who are using Supercede now is actually they are not just getting stuff done sooner, but they're actually changing processes and changing the way they
Mm-hmm.
think about buying reinsurance. I mean, before, just to level set what used to happen at these firms, typically up front at some point, somebody in the outwards team, the outwards buyer, I will have to go and sit in front of a reinsurance committee or some kind of approvals committee and say, here's how much money I would like to spend on reinsurance this year. Sorry, next year. I and here's what I expect to be able to buy with those resources. And then they get some kind of approval, usually with a substantial haircut, to go and spend that much on reinsurance, and with expectations set for what they'll be able to get with that budget. And then they go back to their team and their brokers, and they say, right, let's go and get this data ready and go to market and see what the reality is, and spend a couple of months, figuring out what's actually likely. And at some point, quite far down the line, they'll get to the point where the data's ready and they can start to look at it and they can start quoting. Quite often, there's a bit of a mismatch between what they initially told that budgeting group and what they receive back from the market. That feedback loop is very long at the moment, so that person has to go back to the reinsurance committee or whoever it might be and say, so actually it turns out with that budget originally requested, we are only able to buy 2/3 of what we thought we could buy. Can I have a bit more, please? Or we're going to be left less well covered than we thought. And that's a nasty surprise that people are getting at the moment, a couple of weeks before renewals.
Yeah. There was an article I'd seen and a quote from a CEO of one of the major sort of reinsurers. And it was sort of addressing the hard market. And what he was saying was that they're getting, commentary from the brokers in the market saying, well, this is the mandate. This is what the client has budget for. And the reinsurers now, as the market's hardening, are saying, I don't care. Like if we need this kind of pricing, like this risk is going to cost this much, like tell your client to reevaluate what they're going to do. And I think you're right in that currently, if you're going into the market late because your data preparation is taking ages, you're getting that message very, very late. And now you're going back to committees, or going back to the budget committees, et cetera, saying these layers that are critical to our business are going to be 10-15% more than we were targeting for, or we're going to have to slide retention up in order to afford this. And you're making those decisions like very late in the process. But if you have more time freed up initially, you can spot those things and have more of those conversations earlier in the process, and have a longer window by which you sort of calibrate what your purchase is going to look like for a year. And that's a really, really important piece of work.
I think a lot of this just comes from, in terms of capability, clearing the fog, right? Like at the moment, the stuff that comes out of databases, that comes out of green screen legacy systems, etc., is exported into a CSV or an Excel or whatever is available, and then people are trying to manually mash it together, and that is what I'm calling the fog. I'm with an accidental microphone tap, as I said, the fog. And basically trying to work through all of that fog, as you said, delays all of these processes, but it also means that at some point the cedent needs to give away control of that data to the brokers, to the market, to actually go and figure this out for them. And they are not really empowered as a buyer to make their own decisions about what they buy. It's not so much that they give that power to somebody else, it's actually they just give it away, and it doesn't happen for anyone, right? The brokers find themselves in exactly the same position where they're not given time. It's not like the cedent has said, here's our data, brokers, you go and come up with our buying strategy now. It's more, here's our data. If there's time at the end before renewals, we'll try and come up with a strategy, but your job is to help us clean this. And I think that's where there's probably the most potential to really start changing everybody's ability to impact the buying strategy in the chain, rather than it being sort of something that nobody does.
Well, and this is where that real value add comes from the broker, but also that really valuable collaboration between the cedent and the broker exists, is a real sort of effort spent around understanding the objectives of the client, understanding the various options that they have at their disposal to accomplish and achieve those objectives, and an ability now to do more than, well, we'll just do what we did last year. Well, hopefully we get underneath, if the market's increasing rates 15%, hopefully for this line of business, we can get 9 or 10% uptick, or we've been performing really, really well. So hopefully we can stay flat this year on pricing. Like that's not the most that we can do. And a lot of those constraints and a lot of that existing process and those things that you see in the industry are the result of just data one still being foggy when it goes into the market,
Mm.
which is sort of the reinsurance loading that that the underwriters will do that says, I have a sense of what's here, but I'm not completely clear all the time. So I'm just going to add a bit of a load just to make sure I'm covering myself. So the more time you have to reduce the fog and sort of understand what you're trying to accomplish, the better you'll be positioned to go into the market. The other quotes that are coming out, especially now, is it's all about how the client presents who they are to get the best price,
Yeah.
and clarity around that. Um, we talked to Jacob at BCG in an earlier episode, and one of the things that he'd mentioned was, delivering what you say you're going to deliver, right? And I think that still is very true when you look at a Cedent's outward book, is that we said it's going to look like this, and then you present the data and it looks just like that, and there's actually clarity to that. The comfort that you get with being told something that's true and evidenced to be
Mm.
true, right, without the fog,
It's
is powerful.
It's the catchphrase of a lot of seeded rebuyers, isn't it? No surprises.
Yeah,
Mustn't give them any surprises.
yeah.
And at the moment, what's happening is a lot of these, and you'll remember these meetings that we used to do respectively as broker and underwriter, but I in the months leading up to the December madness, you would have client meetings where the clients would come over, in my case from the US, and visit. In your case, in a different season, I guess, for the April renewals, but I clients would come over and visit, and you would talk about how everything's going and hear from the client firsthand, how they think their business is doing, any major updates, etc. And that conversation would be very light on data. There would be hardly anything in there about the current year because, September, October time, they haven't got any data
Yeah.
about their portfolio. And if they have, it's data as at April of the year. So it's like, well, I can tell you how the first 4 months went.
Yeah.
Because that's what we've had time to clear up. It's more like, oh, we're working on the data now, and we hope there won't be any surprises, but we're still all good people.
Yeah.
Which isn't really enough these days. If you want to be able to get some sign of commitment from a reinsurer in advance that they're going to be there to support you, and that they maybe even would be able to give you some kind of indication at what cost,
Mm-hmm.
You're going to need some data to support those conversations. And I could imagine over time more of those client meetings becoming data driven and actually having a well prepared client that's got all their data in a row earlier, being able to sit down in front of a reinsurer at those meetings and say, right, here's where we are at pretty much today. Here are our projections for the rest of the year based on previous years. Here's whether the book is getting heavier or lighter. Here's what we're expecting to see in terms of profile of business. Obviously, there's still a couple of months to flesh out the rest of the year, but this should give you a pretty good comfort of how the year is going to look. And then the reinsurers at that point, considering the commitments they're willing to make at the moment in December based on the 8 months of data they receive at that point in the foggy state it comes in, I imagine you could get people making pretty good commitments at that point, maybe even quoting, such that that conversation internally then for the cedent could happen the other way around, and they could go to their board or their reinsurance committee or whichever committee for them it is that approves it and say, we have spoken with the reinsurers, we have pitched them this opportunity. Actually, we had a chance to discuss several other options because we gave them the data in advance, and this is what we think we're going to buy. Can we have this budget, please? And no more panic in the actual week of the deal supposed to be going through.
Yeah, and it's the optionality as well, where if everything is in order and everything is what you were expecting, you're in the market first, and you're saying, well, might as well get some quotes in November, October, because your data is ready, and you might as well sort of take some capacity off the table if it makes sense for you. But then if something is different than you were hoping, again, that sooner. So you have another couple months to sort of message it, look for the outliers, look for some of the underlying reasons why a certain part of the book might not be doing as well or wasn't going where you were expecting it to. And you can begin to say, this is why, and we're making these changes to address those things. Like
Yeah.
you have that ability now where when you get the data 2 weeks in advance, it's a bit of a scramble to get a coherent, well-structured narrative to respond to that.
I think this is really interesting when you talk about narrative, right? Because you actually have the opportunity if your data is ready soon enough to not just what currently happens, which is reactively spin the story.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like some reinsurer X and all the other reinsurers have come back to you and said, we all found this in your submission pack. What's that about? And you go, oh, it's yes, it looks bad, but actually, it's actually a good thing because it reflects our commitment to those clients of that type who are actually very resistant to peril. Why? Whereas, as you said, if you've seen that thing coming in advance, it's not even a case of we'll be able to come up with a really good cover story in advance. It's like we could actually remediate that in advance. We could, buy specific retro, get ready to, cover that. We could carve out that piece in some way. We could actually stop writing that and then be able to present an as if based on the future year ahead, with a moratorium on that line of business.
It's a funny anecdote because when we first started looking at other sort of placement platform solutions in the market, this is sort of 4 or 5 years ago now. One of the things that many of them had sort of addressed or talked about as an idea was, here's how you can answer a question for all the markets, because they'd come from this experience where everyone's getting the same question from every single underwriter. But you hit the nail on the head that could be a vestige of the way people used to do the data. It's everyone at whatever time they get through the data pack uncovers this thing that seems confusing or doesn't look right, and the client in the old model going, oh, need to update the other markets that this is the thing that they've uncovered. Another thing that doesn't make any sense. We're scrambling, as you said, in a reactive nature to respond to. Where what we're positioning and positing now is this ability that says, what if you can see those things in advance and then curate a strategy up front that there'll still be communication happens to all the markets, and all that stuff is still basic. But the pain that was they were trying to address was the exact one that you touched on, was when every single reinsurer pokes up the same, the same issue and finds that, where if you can control that narrative, it also presents you in a much clearer way when you think about an industry that's so reliant on trust as reinsurance is. This ability to say up front, hello, here's this thing, but don't worry, we're addressing it through these other means. That adds a huge amount of trust to the relationships that you're going to have with your partners. And that's how you get the best outcome of your reinsurance purchases, to really showcase how trustworthy you are as not only a client, but as a sort of a business partner in that interaction.
I couldn't agree more. And I thought, at the risk of starting an analogy battle, try and talk slowly so you have a chance to come up with something that defeats me as usual. I wanted to try and depict for our listeners what it's like being a cedent at the moment and having to buy, often many reinsurance programs all in a tight window, without having the data ready until the very last minute. And for me, it conjures up this image of going to a pay-by-weight fruit and vegetable market kind of thing. So you're like, okay, I know I need 5 apples. So here are some big cooking apples or whatever. I need some carrots. I need some of this celeriac. I'm trying to think of some interesting fruits and vegetables to bring along. And some potatoes and some figs. I don't know, all sorts of things. And I've got a £20 note or $20 bill, or insert your currency here. And I hope it will be, within that constraint of my £20 note. But I don't have any scales, and there are no scales provided in the shop except at the till. And so I have to kind of be very guessworky about how many apples I put in the bag and how many figs I can have and how many carrots are in the bag. I know roughly how much reinsurers might tend to charge in terms of rates per kilogram. For apples and for figs and things. And obviously my ones might be different. They might be different varieties that I've picked, and they might be different shapes and sizes. But the factor that's completely unknown to me is the weight of my own portfolio of fruit and vegetables. So I go to the till and I squeeze my £20 note very hard and tightly and close my eyes and say a little prayer while the cashier takes each of my
holds your destiny in her hands.
Mini portfolio bags of things, exactly, holding my destiny in their hands, and weighs out each of these things. I'm like, oh, the apples came to £5.50. Oh, it's expensive, inflation. The figs, etc.
A lot of apples.
And so on. I'm going, no, so it's £19, and we've still not done the carrots. And you're like, well, what do I do? Do I cancel the carrots? And then they say, oh, that's £21.50, please. And you're like, there's a massive queue behind you. Everyone's busy, because you're shopping at Christmas basically at this point, and so you have to go.
The Lloyd's reference is strong.
Can I just go to my car and
queue of other underwriters or brokers waiting?
Can I go ask my mum for some more money? Because I didn't get approval to spend more than this on the fruit and veg, and then I would. Couldn't you tell that you were buying more than you could spend on? That's the point. No, you couldn't, because you don't have scales of your own. You don't have scales at home before you go out shopping. You're literally leaving it to the very last minute to work out how much you're going to buy. But if you did, if there was some kind of super scale, let's call it Supercede. Or call it what you like. I would call it Supercede.
Yeah, it's a good name.
Where you could measure out how heavy all these apples and things were beforehand. Then not only would you know how much money you needed to take with you on one side of things and how much you need to get approval for, but alternatively, you could consider buying more or less of certain items. Because you might be that, oh, actually, I weighed it and it's only going to cost me 18 quid, so I'll get some lemons and make a lemon meringue pie as well.
Well, it's that planning piece that I think is spot on, right? When you're going to the shop, when you're going to buy or planning your reinsurance purchasing a year out for what you want to do as a business, if you know up front with better clarity as to how much you can buy of different things, you might look at it and go, we're going to really struggle to buy a sufficient amount of this. So what are our alternative options? We can not make that dish. But if we keep with the food analogy, there are other things you could do. You could buy additional alternative options. You could find different varieties of a thing to sort of try to reduce the price. But that clarity gives you a better ability to prepare in advance what that purchase should look like, what types of things you want to buy and why. But you're exactly right. If we're left making that decision at the till, it makes it very, very hard to calibrate. If I can't buy half the carrots, does the recipe I was going to make still work? Or, all of these, so you're sort of left really panicked, with the alternative being you go back and try to see if you can get more money to do more and keep the sort of strategy as is, or you come back with half the order and go, hopefully this is all going to work out, right? It's not at all ideal. And we talk a lot about how we help people, the ambition to help them control their portfolios, control the decision-making process. This is the exact same thing. It's the better clarity you have, the more control you have over what you decide to purchase for what amount and why. And that clarity helps drive better decision-making, which will permeate through the success of the organization. I think it's a great analogy. I'm not going to try to analogy battle it. And
anything is I'm really hungry now.
Yeah, exactly. My stomach is already grumbling.
But it's going to be especially important, I think, going into what will be the hardest market we've seen for some time. Especially in cat exposed lines, etc. But the challenge I think that faces all cedents at the moment is, as you said, getting the messaging right. Why them? Why are they the special case that they need to be in terms of whatever their particular narrative is that means that reinsurers are willing to get behind them? What is the comfort factor they can bring in terms of, here is the data, this is what's good about it, and actually get out in front of, as you said, what's bad about it. and then be able to have a conversation early with those reinsurers about how much it's going to cost them, so that they can make sure that they are budgeting effectively for that.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these budgeting conversations happen with such senior people or with regulators or so far in advance, you don't actually get many bites at the apple to continue the
Mm-hmm.
discussion, in the sense that, if you're at Lloyd's, for example, the planning discussions for reinsurance purchasing, they have to be approved well in advance of actually buying it. Similarly, if you're going to get approval from a committee that only meets every 6 weeks,
Yeah.
like if you
Yeah.
if you get hit with a curveball, do you really want to be the one who calls an emergency meeting with 6 of the most senior people in the company,
Mm-hmm.
to come and listen to how you've fudged up the reinsurance, and actually you should have asked for more or less, or you want
Mm-hmm.
approval to do something different? You want to be in top form for those conversations, because your entire reputation as a Ceded Re manager or outwards buyer sits on how well you manage the renewal process. So anything that can give you more clarity in advance on what to buy and how much to buy, I think is fully worth it.
Yeah. Well, and I think so much of these conversations now are, as they should be, sort of data driven and data centric. And the more you can sort of point to the ability, one, to drill into the data more granularly and present that to that leadership team, that purchasing committee, and say, this is what our book is doing and why. Like, you have more of that insight to really unpick it. And it presents not only you in the best light to that group about what you're planning to do, but it also gives you the opportunity to then have that same confidence into the market itself. That's saying, this is exactly what we're trying to do. This is how reinsurance is helping us get to that sort of target end state, um, and why you're best suited for, as a, not only a partner, but why you should get the best sort of prices and conditions of those things, because you're presenting yourself very, very clearly with good, reliable data.
And I think internally and externally, what's interesting is, I think a lot of those conversations, as we said, the reinsurer meetings, but also those reinsurance purchasing committee decisions, have been missing the why, the rationale for a lot of these things, to a convincing level.
Yeah.
Meaning that if you're sat as an approver on one of these committees, or if you're sat as a reinsurer, the only question you can really ask most of the time is, what did we do last year?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're sat there trying to when somebody pitches to you, this is what I think we should buy to ensure that we've purchased the right reinsurance. You can't really say anything other than, how does that compare to what we did last year, or why?
Mm-hmm.
And the person you ask why is going to be like, well, we don't really know, but we suspect that we're overexposed here, and that we can get some coverage for it if we try, but we need to get some quotes.
Yeah.
So please give me this giant umbrella box of money to go and buy reinsurance with, and hopefully,
and they'll work off very basic metrics, like covering their 1 in 1,000-year event scenarios and these types of things. It just says, yep, we've modeled this, and we need to buy limits up to this point, and the best price we can get for that is Y, and off we go. And I know there's more to that, right? And I'm not going to sort of downplay the work involved with understanding what they should purchase, but so much work is spent in the first couple of years of a program. But because there's so many deals in the market, there's so little time oftentimes, that I don't think there'd be a lot of pushback to say that that same effort that's done to win an RFP or to restructure a deal is put in every single year, right? It's done every sort of 4 or 5 years or so, right? To sort of reassess what you need to buy and why. And if we get to a point where that super talented, intelligent group of individuals within a firm has better data sooner, you might begin to look at with more focus, every single year reevaluating, going, here's the justification with more sort of data points backing it, why we're going to do something very similar to last year, or why we're going to move the structure around a bit more, because we have a lot of clarity into that.
And not just internally as well, right? But also being able to deliver that information, to deliver it cleanly to the reinsurance partners and to your brokers, so that they can participate in that creativity and help you structure alternative arrangements, rather than, spending the 85% that we have sought to eliminate from all of their backlogs of to-do lists and things, where at the moment if you go to a reinsurer and say, can you consider this other structure for us? And they look at your data and go, no, because I'm going to be spending the next 3 weeks trying to price the old structure based on what you've given me. If we cut that out, the future starts to get a little bit brighter.
Indeed.
I do want to, we haven't got time, I know we sort of talked forever on this episode, but I do want to dig into the sort of credibility and the communications, not only because it's very topical from a Bank of England and British government perspective at the moment, but I do want to dig into this credibility and pricing and how you can have the best conversation with the market about what you want to buy and be the most prepared possible to get the best pricing at renewals. So look out for hopefully something in the show notes at some point, and we'll put a written version of that together as well.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, we had to close there, but don't worry, there will be many more reinsurance podcast episodes.
Don't wait too long. It'll only be another week till you get the next episode of the Reinsurance Podcast.